What would happen if a person who seemed completely freed from unseen forces suddenly found those forces returning, not alone, but bringing with them others that are stronger, more aggressive, and far more difficult to overcome? Why would Jesus choose such a disturbing image to teach a lesson? Is this merely a symbolic warning meant to provoke fear? Or is there a deeper spiritual principle hidden beneath the surface, one that people often overlook? These questions are not just thought-provoking, they confront us with a reality that touches every human life. Is the transformation within us truly lasting, or is it only temporary? If you find content like this helpful for reflecting more deeply on life and faith, don't forget to subscribe and follow the channel so you can continue exploring the deeper meanings of Scripture and how they apply to everyday life. To fully understand this warning, we need to place it within its proper context, a moment that was not only miraculous but also deeply controversial. In the account, Jesus encounters a man in a profoundly afflicted condition. He is blind, unable to speak, and possessed by a demon. This is not merely a physical ailment, it represents a total form of bondage, affecting both body and spirit. The man cannot see, cannot communicate, and has no apparent ability to free himself from the invisible force controlling his life. When Jesus intervenes, the result is not partial improvement, but complete restoration. The man begins to see, he regains his ability to speak, and the oppressive force is entirely broken. For those witnessing the event, this is more than a miracle. It feels like a moment that transcends ordinary understanding. Awe spreads through the crowd, and with it arises a question that cannot be ignored. Could this be the long-awaited Messiah? Yet the response of the people is far from unified. On one hand, many are amazed and begin to open themselves to the possibility that they are witnessing something divine. On the other hand, hesitation remains. They are caught between what they have seen with their own eyes and the belief systems they have long held. Faith does not emerge automatically, even in the presence of compelling evidence. Meanwhile, the Pharisees, the religious authorities of the time, respond in a completely different way. Rather than considering that this power might come from God, they make a serious accusation that Jesus is casting out demons by the power of Satan himself. This is not simply skepticism, it is a deliberate attempt to discredit the source of the miracle entirely. What was an act of liberation is reframed as something suspicious, even dangerous. At this point, the situation moves beyond a simple miracle or an emotional reaction. It becomes a confrontation over the nature of spiritual authority. Two opposing interpretations stand side by side. Either this power comes from God, or it comes from an opposing force. And in that moment, neutrality is no longer an option. The reaction of the Pharisees also reveals an important truth about human nature. People do not respond only to what they see, but to what they have already decided to believe. When reality challenges an existing framework, there is a strong tendency to reinterpret that reality in order to preserve prior assumptions. In this case, it leads them to attribute an act of healing and freedom to a source of darkness. From here, the foundation is set for one of Jesus's most profound teachings. The miracle is not the conclusion, it is the starting point for a deeper revelation. It raises an unavoidable question. If a person can be freed from something evil, what happens next? Is that freedom enough to ensure lasting safety? Or is there a missing element that, if left unaddressed, could allow something even worse to return? It is within this tension that the warning of the empty house begins to take on its full meaning. It does not appear as an isolated metaphor, but as a logical continuation of everything that has just occurred. When a person is cleansed but not filled, when something harmful is removed but nothing takes its place, that condition is not a final state. It is a fragile and temporary transition. And this is the shocking paradox that Jesus brings into focus. The danger is not only in being possessed by something evil, but also in being freed from it while remaining empty within. At this critical point in the narrative, the tension reaches a level that demands not just observation, but interpretation. The miracle has already taken place, the reactions have been revealed, and the accusation has been made. Now the focus shifts to something deeper, the nature of spiritual authority itself. Jesus does not respond emotionally or defensively. Instead, he elevates the discussion to a level of logic and fundamental principles, exposing not only the flaw in his opponent's reasoning, but also the deeper reality behind what is unfolding. He begins with a principle so simple that it is almost impossible to refute. A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. This is not merely a metaphorical statement, it is a structural truth about power and stability. Any system, whether political, social, or spiritual, that turns against itself inevitably collapses from within. Internal contradiction leads to fragmentation, and fragmentation leads to destruction. There is no sustainable future for a force that undermines its own existence. From this foundational principle, Jesus directs a precise and unavoidable question back to his accusers. If Satan is casting out Satan, then Satan is working against himself. If that were true, it would mean that the very force they claim is behind the miracle is actively dismantling its own influence. But such a scenario is inherently illogical. A kingdom bent on survival does not sabotage its own structure. Power does not willingly erode itself. The accusation, when examined through the lens of its own logic, collapses under its own weight. This response does more than defend Jesus against criticism. It reveals the inconsistency in the thinking of the Pharisees. Their interpretation is not grounded in reason, but in the need to preserve their existing framework. Faced with something they cannot explain within their system, they choose to distort the explanation rather than reconsider their assumptions. In doing so, they expose a deeper resistance, not just to a miracle, but to the possibility that their understanding of spiritual reality may be incomplete. Having dismantled their argument, Jesus then presents a conclusion that shifts the entire meaning of the event. If the power at work is not from Satan, then it must come from another source. And if it comes from the Spirit of God, then what is happening is not simply an isolated act of healing, it is a sign, an indication that something far greater is taking place. The kingdom of God is not distant or abstract, it is actively present, breaking into human reality. This declaration transforms the situation entirely. What seemed like a singular miracle is now revealed as evidence of a larger movement, a confrontation between two opposing domains. The event is no longer about whether a man has been healed, but about what that healing represents. It signals the presence of a new authority, one that challenges and overrides the old structures of power. And in that moment, neutrality becomes impossible. To witness such an act is to be confronted with a choice, to recognize it as divine or to reject it outright. It is precisely within this heightened tension that Jesus introduces one of his most striking and unsettling images, the parable of the empty house. This is not a disconnected teaching, but a direct continuation of the principle he has just established. If a new kingdom is indeed present, then the question is not only about its arrival, but about how it is received within the human person. The parable unfolds with a simple yet profound sequence. An unclean spirit leaves a person. Its departure suggests a form of liberation, a release from control, a moment that might easily be interpreted as a complete and final victory. But the story does not end there. The spirit, now displaced, wanders through dry and desolate places, searching for rest, but finding none. This wandering is not aimless. It reflects a state of dislocation, a force without a place to inhabit. Eventually, the spirit makes a decision. It returns to the place it once occupied. This return is not accidental, it is deliberate. It is based on the expectation that the previous dwelling may still be accessible, and when it arrives, it makes a critical observation. The house is found in a particular condition. It is clean, it is orderly, and it appears well maintained. Everything that once made it a place of corruption has been removed. On the surface, this seems like a positive transformation, but beneath that appearance lies a crucial absence. The house is empty. This detail changes everything. The problem is not that the house is dirty or broken. The problem is that it is unoccupied. There is no presence within it that claims ownership, no authority that governs it, no force that secures it against intrusion. It has been cleansed, but it has not been filled. It has been arranged, but it has not been inhabited. Recognizing this vulnerability, the spirit does not return alone. It brings with it 7 other spirits more wicked than itself. This is not merely an increase in number, it is an escalation in intensity. What was once a singular presence becomes a collective force. What was once manageable becomes overwhelming. The return is not just a repetition of the past, it is an amplification of it. The final condition of the person, Jesus explains, becomes worse than the initial state. This outcome reveals the core principle embedded within the parable. Liberation, by itself, is not enough. The removal of what is harmful does not automatically result in lasting security. In fact, if nothing takes the place of what has been removed, the resulting emptiness becomes a point of weakness, a condition that invites a more powerful reoccupation. This is the unsettling truth at the heart of the teaching. The danger is not only in the presence of evil, but in the absence of something greater to replace it. An empty space does not remain neutral, it becomes available. And what fills it next determines the ultimate direction of a person's life. In this way, the parable of the empty house is not merely a warning about spiritual forces, it is a profound insight into the nature of transformation itself. True change is not defined solely by what is removed, but by what is established in its place. Without that second step, the first remains incomplete, and what appears to be freedom may, in time, reveal itself to be only a temporary reprieve. What emerges from this parable is not merely a vivid image, but a governing principle, one that challenges one of the most common assumptions people make about change. Many believe that once something negative is removed, the situation naturally improves and stabilizes. But the teaching of Jesus exposes a far more complex reality. In the spiritual dimension, there is no such thing as a neutral state. Emptiness is not passive, it is not harmless. It is, in fact, a condition of vulnerability. The idea that a person can exist in a stable, unclaimed middle ground, neither influenced by darkness nor filled with something greater, is an illusion. According to the logic embedded in this teaching, every inner space is either occupied or open to occupation. There is no lasting equilibrium in which nothing takes hold. This is why the image of the empty house is so unsettling. It challenges the instinctive belief that nothing bad automatically means everything is fine. In reality, the absence of something negative does not guarantee the presence of something good. This leads directly to the first core principle. There is no neutral condition within the human soul. Emptiness itself is not a safe resting point. It is a transitional state that demands resolution. If nothing enters to establish presence and authority, something else inevitably will. The vacuum does not remain a vacuum for long. It becomes an invitation. This reframes the entire concept of spiritual safety. It is not defined by what has been removed, but by what has taken its place. A life that has been cleared of destructive patterns may appear stable on the surface, but if it remains unanchored, if it lacks a central governing presence, then that stability is fragile at best. What appears to be peace may actually be a temporary silence before something stronger returns. Closely connected to this is the second principle. Cleansing is not the same as transformation. Removing harmful behaviors, breaking negative habits, or distancing oneself from destructive influences can create the appearance of change. And in many ways, these steps are important. They represent real progress. But they do not, by themselves, redefine the core of a person's inner life. Transformation, in its true sense, requires more than subtraction. It requires replacement. It is not enough to eliminate what is wrong. Something must be established in its place that is strong enough to remain. Otherwise, the change exists only at the level of form, not substance. The external structure may look different, but the internal condition remains unresolved. This distinction between outward appearance and inward reality is crucial. A person can appear disciplined, controlled, even morally upright, while still lacking a foundational center. The house can be clean, it can be arranged, it can even be decorated in a way that suggests order and intention. But none of these qualities guarantee security. Without an occupying presence, without something that claims and sustains the space, the condition remains incomplete. This leads to the third principle. Emptiness creates opportunity. Not in a positive sense, but in a structural one. An unoccupied space is inherently accessible. It is open to whatever seeks entry. And in the context of the parable, this openness is precisely what allows the return, not just of what was there before, but of something greater in force and impact. The escalation described in the story is not arbitrary. It reflects a pattern. When a space has been cleared but not secured, it becomes easier to re-enter and more difficult to reclaim once it has been occupied again. The return is stronger because the vulnerability has been exposed. What was once a single presence becomes a collective force, reinforcing itself within the same unguarded environment. At this point, the symbolic structure of the parable becomes essential for understanding its full depth. Each element in the image carries a layered meaning, pointing beyond the literal scenario to a broader reality about human existence. The house represents the inner life of a person, the mind, the heart, the will, the center where identity and direction are formed. It is not a physical space, but a conceptual one, encompassing everything that defines who a person is from within. This is where influences take root, where decisions are shaped, and where alignment is either established or lost. The act of cleaning the house symbolizes the process of removing what is harmful. This can take many forms: turning away from destructive behaviors, letting go of toxic patterns, rejecting influences that distort or weaken the self. It is an act of clearing, of restoring order where there was once chaos. And in itself, it is necessary. A house filled with disorder cannot function properly. But cleaning, as significant as it is, does not determine who or what will occupy the space afterward. The idea of the house being put in order, or even decorated, adds another layer. It suggests intentionality, structure, even a kind of aesthetic improvement. This can be understood as the development of outward discipline, moral behavior, or adherence to certain standards. From the outside, everything may appear stable, even admirable. There is a visible difference compared to the previous state. Yet the most critical detail remains. The house is still empty. This emptiness is not merely the absence of former problems, it is the absence of a defining presence. It indicates that while the space has been prepared, it has not been claimed. There is no authority residing within it, no sustaining force that governs and protects it. In theological terms, this absence points to the lack of divine presence, the absence of God as the central occupant of the human soul. And this is where the entire teaching converges. The issue is not simply about avoiding what is wrong, it is about establishing what is right at the deepest level. A life that is only defined by what it has rejected remains incomplete. It may look different, but it is not yet secure. The structure is there, but the foundation is missing. In this light, the parable becomes more than a warning. It becomes a diagnostic tool. It exposes the difference between surface-level change and true transformation. It challenges the assumption that improvement is enough, and it redirects attention to the question that ultimately matters: what or who truly inhabits the inner life? Because in the end, the condition of the house is not determined by how clean it is, but by who lives in it. Flowing naturally from this understanding, the parable does not merely describe a condition, it reveals a pattern, even a strategy. What initially appears as a simple return of an unclean spirit is, upon closer examination, something far more deliberate. The movement is calculated, persistent, and adaptive. It is not driven by impulse, but by recognition of opportunity. And this introduces a sobering dimension to the teaching. The forces being described do not simply disappear when expelled. They remain aware, observant, and ready to act when conditions allow. The first characteristic of this strategy is persistence. The spirit that leaves does not vanish into non-existence. It continues to exist in a state of displacement. Its wandering through dry places suggests not rest, but restlessness, a condition in which it seeks re-entry, searching for a place to inhabit. The absence of rest does not lead to resignation, it leads to return. This is a critical point. The departure of something harmful should not be mistaken for its defeat. Removal is not equivalent to elimination. What has been cast out may still be waiting for the right moment to come back. This persistence challenges a common assumption, that once something negative is removed, it is gone for good. In reality, the parable suggests the opposite. What has been removed may retain both the memory of its former place and the inclination to reclaim it. The return is not random, it is intentional. It is based on the expectation that the previous environment might still be accessible, especially if nothing has taken its place. This leads to the second dimension of the strategy, escalation. When the spirit returns, it does not come alone. It brings with it 7 other spirits more wicked than itself. The number here is not merely quantitative, it carries qualitative weight. It signifies completeness, intensity, and amplification. What was once a single presence becomes a compounded force. The situation is no longer what it was before. It has advanced to a more complex and entrenched state. This escalation reflects a principle of reinforcement. A previously occupied space, once reopened, is more vulnerable than it was initially. The defenses have already been breached once. The structure, though cleaned, has not been fortified. As a result, the returning force does not simply re-enter, it strengthens its hold, ensuring that future removal becomes even more difficult. The progression from 1 to 7 is not accidental, it represents a deliberate increase in strength, depth, and resistance. The third aspect is organization. The return is not chaotic, it is structured. The language of the parable suggests coordination, as if the reoccupation is carried out with a level of intentional planning. This is not a random scattering of influences, but a concentrated effort to reclaim and dominate a specific space. The implication is clear: vulnerability does not go unnoticed. Where there is emptiness, there is accessibility, and where there is accessibility, there is the potential for organized re-entry. Understanding this strategic dimension reframes the entire warning. It is no longer simply about avoiding a negative condition, it is about recognizing the dynamics that operate beneath the surface. The danger lies not only in what has been present, but in what is capable of returning, and how it returns. The progression from absence to reoccupation reveals that the stakes are higher than they first appear. A temporary victory can become the foundation for a more severe defeat if it is not followed by a permanent establishment of something stronger. It is at this point that the teaching intersects with another critical issue: the nature of religious life itself, particularly when it is reduced to outward form. The image of the clean, orderly, yet empty house becomes a powerful critique of a mindset that equates external correctness with internal security. It exposes a subtle but widespread misunderstanding, the belief that if nothing visibly wrong remains, then everything must be right. This is the first and most common error, assuming that the absence of evil is equivalent to the presence of good. It is an appealing idea because it simplifies the process of change. Remove the negative, and the problem is solved. But the parable dismantles this assumption completely. It shows that an environment can be free from visible corruption and still be fundamentally unstable. The absence of disorder does not guarantee the presence of life. This misunderstanding often manifests in religious contexts as a focus on behavior rather than transformation. A person may avoid certain actions, adhere to moral standards, and maintain a disciplined outward life. From an external perspective, everything appears in order. The house is clean, it is arranged, it even reflects a kind of intentional design. But if this structure lacks a central indwelling presence, if it is not inhabited by something that defines and sustains it, then it remains vulnerable. This leads to the second point. Without the presence of God, the condition is still dangerous. The parable does not suggest that neutrality is possible. A life that is not actively aligned with a higher authority is not protected simply because it avoids obvious wrongdoing. In fact, its very emptiness becomes the point of weakness. It is not defended, not anchored, not secured. This is where the teaching becomes deeply challenging. It confronts the idea that self-improvement by itself is sufficient. Effort, discipline, and moral refinement are valuable, but they are not ultimate safeguards. They can shape behavior, but they cannot, on their own, establish a permanent inner authority. Without that authority, the structure remains open, capable of being influenced, redirected, or overtaken. The third point follows naturally. Outward morality has limits. It can regulate actions, but it cannot fully transform the core. It can create order, but it cannot guarantee permanence. It can produce the appearance of stability, but it cannot prevent internal vulnerability if it is not rooted in something deeper. This does not diminish the value of ethical living. Rather, it places it in proper context. External discipline is not the destination. It is part of the preparation. It clears the space, organizes it, and makes it ready. But preparation is not completion. A house prepared but unoccupied is still at risk. In this sense, the critique is not directed against religious practice itself, but against a version of it that stops at the surface. When faith is reduced to form, when it becomes a system of behaviors without an internal center, it loses its protective power. It becomes structure without substance, order without presence. And this brings the teaching back to its central question, now sharpened with greater clarity. If the house is clean, if it is in order, if it appears ready, what or who will ultimately inhabit it? All of this inevitably leads to a deeply personal dimension. The parable is not merely descriptive, it is confrontational. It moves from observation to introspection, from theory to self-examination. After tracing the logic, the symbolism, and the underlying strategy, the question is no longer abstract. It becomes immediate and unavoidable. What is actually dwelling within the inner space of our own lives? This is where the teaching demands honesty. It is easy to analyze the condition of the house in general terms, but far more difficult to apply that analysis inward. What occupies the center of thought, desire, and decision? What holds authority when no one else is watching? These are not questions that can be answered superficially. They require a level of clarity that goes beyond outward behavior and reaches into the core of identity. The question is not simply whether something negative has been removed. Many people can point to changes they have made, habits they have broken, influences they have rejected, patterns they have left behind. These are real and meaningful steps. But the deeper question remains: what has replaced them? What now defines the structure that remains? In a modern context, this issue becomes even more complex. It is entirely possible, perhaps even common, for a person to live what appears to be a good life while remaining internally unanchored. Discipline can be developed, productivity can be optimized, behavior can be refined. From the outside, such a life may look stable, even admirable. The house is not only clean, it is well maintained and carefully arranged. Yet beneath that structure, there may still be a kind of emptiness. Not necessarily a visible absence, but a lack of ultimate grounding, a missing center that gives meaning and permanence to everything else. This is the subtle danger of modern self-improvement when it exists without a deeper foundation. It focuses on removing inefficiency, eliminating weakness, and enhancing performance, but often stops short of addressing the question of ultimate alignment. A person can become more controlled, more disciplined, more effective, and still remain fundamentally unoccupied at the deepest level. The structure improves, but the question of who or what governs it remains unanswered. And according to the principle established in the parable, that unanswered question is not neutral. It represents an open condition, a space that has not yet been secured. This is why the danger described by Jesus is not limited to overtly destructive lives. It extends to those that appear orderly but lack a defining presence. A life that is good in form but empty in essence is not stable. It is incomplete. And because it is incomplete, it remains vulnerable. The modern emphasis on self-sufficiency can intensify this condition. When transformation is approached purely as a human-driven process, when it is reduced to effort, discipline, and personal development, it may achieve surface-level success while leaving the deeper structure unresolved. The house is improved, but it is still, in a critical sense, uninhabited. This leads to the essential direction implied by the teaching. The goal is not merely to remove what is wrong, but to establish what is right in a way that is enduring. The process is not only subtractive, but also constructive. It requires not just clearing space, but filling it with something that can sustain and govern it. This filling is not symbolic in a vague sense. It is specific. It points to the presence of God as the central reality within the human soul, not as an external concept, not as a distant belief, but as an indwelling presence that defines and secures the inner life. This is the only condition in which the house is no longer vulnerable because it is no longer empty. To be filled, in this context, means more than adopting religious practices or affirming certain ideas. It means allowing a new center of authority to take residence, a presence that shapes thought, directs will, and establishes continuity. It is the difference between managing behavior and transforming identity. One operates at the level of control, the other at the level of being. And this is where the teaching reaches its final clarity. Emptiness does not remain empty. It cannot. The structure of the human inner life does not allow for indefinite neutrality. If it is not filled intentionally, it will be filled eventually by something else. The question is not whether the space will be occupied, but by what. This leads to a decisive moment of choice, not necessarily a single dramatic decision, but a continual orientation. What is being allowed to take root? What is being given authority? What is shaping the direction of the inner life over time? These are the decisions that determine whether the condition remains stable or becomes vulnerable again. And yet, within this warning, there is also a profound sense of hope. The message is not designed to produce fear, but awareness. It does not end with the inevitability of failure, but with the possibility of fullness. The same teaching that exposes vulnerability also reveals the path to security. The solution is not simply to try harder, to be more disciplined, or to maintain a stricter form of control. It is to recognize that the human soul was not designed to remain empty. It was designed to be inhabited. And when it is filled by the presence of God, the dynamic changes entirely. The house is no longer just clean, it is occupied. It is no longer just arranged, it is secured. In that state, the return described in the parable loses its foothold. Not because external forces cease to exist, but because the internal condition has been fundamentally altered. The space is no longer available, it is no longer open, it belongs to something greater. This is the final message that emerges from the entire progression. The goal is not a life that is merely improved, but a life that is indwelt, not a structure that is simply maintained, but one that is fully inhabited. Because in the end, the safety of the house is not determined by how empty it is of wrong things, but by how full it is of the right presence.